My name is Abigail Parker. The night before I moved from Ohio to Seattle, I reserved a table for 12. My family promised they'd come. By 7:30, the waiter quietly removed 11 untouched place settings. Before I left, he folded one unused menu into my receipt. I borrowed his pen. Then I wrote, "Reservation for 12. Goodbye for 1." I folded it carefully, then tucked it into my suitcase. 6 weeks later, my father, David Parker, called. He said, "Abigail, I know we haven't talked much, but family helps family." I didn't answer right away, because he had no idea. The company he was begging me to save had just been assigned to my desk, and this time, I wasn't the one asking for a seat at the table. The night before I moved to Seattle, I reserved a table for 12, not because I loved goodbyes, because I wanted one last dinner with the people I'd spent my whole life trying to matter to. Mom confirmed that morning. Dad texted, "We'll be there." Madison asked if the restaurant had valet parking. For a few hours, I actually believed all of them. I arrived 20 minutes early. The waiter smiled. "Your party should be here soon." I kept checking the entrance. Every time the door opened, it wasn't my family. At exactly 7:30, the waiter quietly asked, "Would you like me to remove the extra place settings?" I nodded. One by one, 11 plates disappeared. An hour later, the only person who walked through the door was Mrs. Evelyn Porter, our elderly neighbor. She carried a small gift bag and hugged me. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't want you eating alone." She wasn't even invited. She simply noticed my family's cars were gone, and she understood what that meant. When dinner ended, the waiter folded one untouched menu inside my receipt. "I thought you might want this." I stared at it for a long moment, then borrowed his pen. Across the front I wrote, "Reservation for 12. Goodbye for 1." I folded it carefully, then slipped it into my suitcase. I didn't know it yet, but I'd keep that menu for a very long time. By the time I got home, the messages finally arrived. "Dad, long day, we'll celebrate next time." "Mom, I've had a terrible headache." Then I opened Instagram. Madison had posted rooftop photos. She was smiling with our cousins. The restaurant was less than 5 minutes from mine. Apparently, they had all found time for each other, just not for me. The next morning, nobody came to drive me to the airport. Not Mom, not Dad, not Ethan. Mrs. Evelyn Porter knocked on my door instead. "I made coffee, and I already loaded your suitcase." The drive was quiet. Before I got out, she squeezed my hand. "They're making a mistake." I smiled. "I know." While I waited at my gate, Mom finally texted, "Send pictures when you land." Dad didn't message at all. A few minutes later, Ethan asked, "Can I use your parking space while you're gone?" I stared at my phone. Nobody asked if I was scared. Nobody asked if I'd be okay. They only acted like I'd never really left. Seattle greeted me with cold rain and complete silence. No one was waiting at baggage claim. No welcome signs, no family hugs. Just a driver holding a small card, Northbridge Capital Partners. For the first time in years, someone had shown up exactly when they promised. The office overlooked Elliott Bay. Modern. Quiet. Nothing like the factories back home. Human Resources handed me my badge, then smiled. "Ms. Parker. Ms. Rhodes will see you now." I had read everything about Vivian Rhodes. People called her one of the toughest turnaround executives in the country. I had no idea. She already knew my name. Vivian Rhodes stood as I entered her office. She shook my hand, then smiled. "Welcome to Northbridge, Abigail. I've heard about you long before your interview." I frowned. "From who?" She leaned back calmly. "You'll understand soon enough." Then she slid my first assignment across the desk. I looked down at the company name, and suddenly, Ohio didn't feel very far away anymore. I carried the file back to my office. Across the front, one name was stamped in bold: Harrison Tool and Supply. I froze. It was the same company my father had worked for almost 30 years. The company he always called the only place worth building a career. I slowly opened the file. A few minutes later, Vivian Rhodes knocked on my door. "I assume you recognize the company?" "I do." She nodded. "That's why I wanted to speak with you first." "I've already disclosed my family connection," I said. Vivian smiled. "Exactly. You told us. That's why I trust you." For the first time, being honest worked in my favor. Until that day, even my family thought I'd taken an ordinary corporate job. They were wrong. Northbridge didn't simply invest in companies. We investigated them, audited them, restructured them. Sometimes we saved businesses. Sometimes we shut them down. Our reports decided which future they deserved. I spent the afternoon reviewing Harrison's financial reports, late vendor payments, falling profits, delayed compliance filings. The deeper I looked, the worse everything became. By sunset, one sentence in the report stood out: 700 jobs depended on this review. That evening, my phone buzzed. Our family group chat. Madison had sent a selfie. "How's rainy Seattle?" Dad replied. "She'll be back by Christmas." Mom added, "A girl shouldn't live alone forever." Nobody asked what I actually did for work. Apparently, they'd already decided it wasn't important. The next morning, I reviewed Harrison's leadership chart. Then one name stopped me cold. Brandon Hayes, Madison's fiancé. His department had doubled its spending in less than a year. No explanation, no supporting notes, just rising costs. Something didn't feel right. I followed the invoices. One vendor appeared again, and again, and again. Different projects, same company, same approval pattern. The payments totaled millions. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't carelessness. Someone had built a system. I clicked on the vendor registration. The business address appeared. I blinked, then read it again. It wasn't a warehouse. It wasn't an office. It was Madison's apartment. My heartbeat quickened. Why would a consulting company be registered there? One approval document appeared after another. Every purchase order carried the same signature: David Parker. I stared at the pages. Dad wasn't receiving the money, but he had approved it. Over, and over, and over again, without proper review. Just as I closed the file, my phone rang. Dad. I almost let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. He sounded unusually cheerful. "So, how's the new job?" It was the first time he'd asked. Something told me. He wasn't calling because he missed me. He was calling because he needed something. And I was about to find out what it was. Dad didn't waste much time. "So, how's the new job treating you?" I smiled to myself. It was the first time he'd asked. Not because he cared, because something had changed. I answered, "It's been busy." He laughed. "That's corporate life." If only he knew. The next morning, Vivian Rhodes stopped by my office. "How's Harrison looking?" I handed her my preliminary notes. "Worse than expected." She nodded. "I thought so." Then she looked directly at me. "I chose you because you notice what other people ignore." For the first time, someone valued the very thing my family always overlooked. I spent hours tracing vendor payments. Every trail led back to the same consulting firm, Hayes Strategic Solutions. The invoices kept growing. The work descriptions became more vague. Operational support, strategic review, executive consulting. Millions of dollars, with almost nothing to show for them. I opened the business registration again. There it was. The registered address, Madison's apartment. I leaned back slowly. This wasn't just Brandon's company anymore. My sister's home was tied to it, whether she knew it or not. That evening, social media answered my question. Madison uploaded dozens of photos she and Brandon were celebrating. The caption read, "Executive life starts now." Dad commented, "Hard work always wins." Mom replied, "So proud of our future son-in-law." I quietly closed the app. They were celebrating a promotion that hadn't happened yet. 2 days later, Mom sent a family group message. "Celebration dinner for Brandon this Saturday." Everyone reacted with heart emojis. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't invited. Apparently, moving across the country had made me optional. Again, I stayed late finishing the first audit summary. Late vendor payments, compliance failures, questionable consulting expenses. At the bottom, one recommendation: immediate executive review required. I sent it to Vivian. Less than 5 minutes later, she replied, "Excellent work." The next morning, Vivian asked me into her office. She closed the door. "You know this review could change lives." "I do." "Can you stay objective?" I answered without hesitation. "My family doesn't get special treatment. They get the same facts as everyone else." Vivian smiled. "That's exactly why you're leading this." Friday evening, Dad called again. This time his voice sounded different, softer. "Abigail, I know we haven't talked much." He paused, then quietly said, "But family helps family." I didn't interrupt. I simply listened, because I finally understood. This wasn't a father calling his daughter. It was an employee calling someone he didn't realize had authority. Dad cleared his throat. "Harrison's getting reviewed by some investment firm. I heard they're sending people from Seattle." Then he laughed. "Maybe you'll meet one of them someday." I looked out my office window, then calmly replied, "Maybe." After we hung up, I opened the audit calendar. Board review meeting, Tuesday. Lead presenter, Abigail Parker. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into a room hoping my family would notice me. I was walking into one where they wouldn't be able to ignore me. Tuesday morning. The Harrison conference room was full. Executives, investors, department heads. Dad sat near the front. Brandon adjusted his tie. Neither of them looked at me twice. They assumed I was another analyst. Then Vivian Rhodes walked in. The room immediately stood. She smiled. "I'd like to introduce the operational turnaround director leading today's review." She turned toward me. "Abigail Parker." Dad's face lost all color. Silence filled the room. Brandon slowly lowered his notebook. Moments earlier, they hadn't recognized me. Now every investor was looking my way. Dad whispered, "Abigail?" I nodded politely. "Good morning." That was all I said, because the presentation would speak for itself. The first slide appeared. Operational losses, revenue decline, missed deadlines, vendor complaints. Nobody spoke. Then came slide 2. Compliance failures. Every issue had documentation. Every document had dates. Every date had signatures. Some of those signatures belonged to Dad. Slide 3 appeared. Outside vendor payments. Hayes Strategic Solutions. Brandon smiled nervously. "That's my consulting firm." I nodded. "It is." Then I clicked again. Payment totals filled the screen. Millions of dollars. The room became uncomfortably quiet. I opened another file. Business registration. Registered address. Madison Parker's apartment. Brandon immediately stood. "That's irrelevant." I calmly replied, "It's part of the financial review." Nobody interrupted again. The investors were already taking notes. The meeting paused for a short break. Dad hurried toward me. "Abigail, you don't have to include everything." I looked at him. "Everything?" He lowered his voice. We're family. I smiled sadly. You remembered that 6 weeks too late. He looked away. When the meeting resumed, Brandon tried defending the invoices. They were approved. They created value. I clicked another slide. Vendor performance reports. No measurable results. Missed milestones. Duplicate billing. The room stayed silent, because numbers don't argue. One board member leaned forward. So, Mr. Hayes, your executive promotion was scheduled for next month? Brandon nodded weakly. The chairman closed the folder. It isn't anymore. Just like that. Years of networking disappeared. Without drama. Without shouting. Just one decision. The presentation ended. Nobody clapped. Dad slowly walked toward me. I thought you'd always help us. I looked directly at him. I always wanted to. I paused. But you skipped the one night I asked you to show up. He couldn't answer. Because both of us remembered the empty table. Before leaving, I opened my notebook. Inside, the folded restaurant menu. The edges had softened with time. Across the front, my handwriting was still there. Reservation for 12. Goodbye for 1. I placed it quietly beside my audit report. Dad stared at it. Not the report. The menu. Because for the first time, he realized the night they left me sitting alone had followed us all the way into that boardroom. 2 days later, Northbridge held its final review. The board voted unanimously. Harrison Tool and Supply would survive, but only after a complete restructuring. Several leadership positions were eliminated. One of them was Brandon's. He packed his office before noon. Dad wasn't fired, but he wasn't staying in charge either. Vivian looked at him kindly. We're offering you a field advisory position. No purchasing authority. No contract approvals. Compliance training is mandatory. Dad quietly signed the paperwork. The man who once approved million-dollar projects now reported to someone else. Madison called me that evening. You ruined everything. I stayed quiet. She kept talking. Brandon says this is your fault. I finally answered. No. It's the paperwork's fault. Long silence. Then the call ended. For the first time, she had no comeback. A month later, Mom showed up outside my apartment. She looked older, tired. She held a small bakery box. My favorite cinnamon rolls. She smiled weakly. I remembered. I invited her inside. She looked around. You built a beautiful life? I simply nodded, because she hadn't been there while I built it. Mom looked down at her coffee. I thought you didn't need us. I smiled sadly. I needed you. I just stopped asking. Tears filled her eyes. We always believed you were the strong one. I became strong because nobody came. Neither of us spoke after that. Sometimes, silence tells the truth better than apologies. If you've ever stopped waiting for people to choose you, comment. I chose myself. Before flying home, Mom admitted something. Do you know who recommended you to Northbridge? I smiled. I do now. Mrs. Evelyn Porter's son, Jonathan Porter, was Northbridge's senior partner. Years earlier, his mother had watched me work, watched me solve problems, watched me stay kind, even when my own family overlooked me. She told him, "That girl's going somewhere." She was right. Dad called a week later. His voice sounded different. I finally read your audit. You were fair. I thanked him. Then he quietly added, I also found the restaurant receipt. My chest tightened. I should have been there. I closed my eyes. I know. For once, neither of us argued. Months later, Northbridge successfully completed the turnaround. 700 employees kept their jobs. The company recovered. Dad adjusted to his new position. Madison and Brandon ended their engagement. Life moved on, but one memory never did. That empty chair at my farewell dinner. It reminded me that disappointment can become direction if you keep walking. Almost a year later, Mom invited everyone to dinner again. This time, every chair was filled. Dad stood before we ate. He looked at me. I spent years believing confidence mattered more than character. I was wrong. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. Some apologies deserve silence, not celebration. When dinner ended, Dad quietly looked at me. Neither of us mentioned the farewell dinner. We didn't have to. I had never kept that old menu to make anyone feel guilty. I kept it to remind myself. The night they left me sitting alone was the night I stopped begging for a place at their table. My name is Abigail Parker. I moved across the country believing my family had forgotten my goodbye. 6 weeks later, they discovered I had walked into the one room where their future depended on my judgment. They thought I was leaving with nothing. What they never realized was that I wasn't leaving my future behind. I was walking toward it.